Hi everyone, thank you so much for your time today. Today is the second IWD sessions for Bangkit 2021. So for these sessions, we will discussing about tech for good. And for these sessions, we will have Astrid Weber, who is leading UX research team for Google's mobile assistant. And hi Astrid.
Hello, everyone.
And we also have Samantha, who is a senior staff software engineer in site reliability engineer based in Zurich. Hi, Samantha.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, without further ado, I'll leave the stage to Astrid to start the first sessions. Enjoy, guys.
Hello, everyone. So happy to be here today. Thank you for the invite. As we already heard, I'm working on the intersection of user experience, technology, and like how we can make it work for people. And so usually I'm doing that in my core role. But as you also maybe already heard, there's such a thing as like 20% projects at Google in which you can pursue an additional project. And in our cases, those are like Google.org engagements. And so we're going to tell you a little bit more how we've been using our skills in order to like help a good cause. Very concretely, I'm going to cover an engagement I did a few years ago already, where it was about redesigning the digital information offerings for refugees arriving on the European continent. And very importantly, I also like to emphasize that none of these efforts that we go into are ever like a one-person project, but they're always like team projects. And I think that's also true no matter where you like engage yourself with your skills. Like it's all about like having a really strong and very diverse team where people can complement each other with their skills. So here you see the partners I had on my team. A little shout out to them and how we supported each other throughout the project. I also want to talk a little bit about our partner. So the International Rescue Committee is the biggest NGO when it comes to like refugees, I think, in the world. And they are trying to like help refugees with bringing information that enables refugees to take the best possible decisions about like how they want to like go about their personal journey, as well as like supporting them on like how to get resources, like how to have food, education, and so on and so forth. So everything that a human being needs, especially when they're like displaced out of like their home context while they're on their journey. So I'm trying to keep things like as brief as possible today. Obviously, this was a much larger project where we worked on a total of like several weeks with the NGO. But like to give you a little bit of background, we had the following brief. We designed a mobile website and digital information offerings for refugee.info to make it as easy as possible for refugees to find relevant information. And so this is, in a nutshell, what we are trying to do and to try to like live up to helping the NGO to make progress. Because their information offering had very organically grown over the years while just like urgency was needed. But this was a moment to like reflect and see if we could do a better job in like helping them to communicate more clearly with their customers who the refugees are. So let me also tell you a little bit more about like what the situation was like. So the majority of refugees entering through Greece, which you can see here like on the map, are coming from Syria and Afghanistan. Some are also from Pakistan, Iraq, Iran, Somalia, and other countries. At the moment, we're actually having the biggest like refugee population in the world ever since World War II. And to put this in numbers, it's approximately 65 million people that are currently displaced, 12 million of those alone from Syria. Reasons why people become refugees or like inherit that status is because they are prosecuted for their political or religious beliefs, their ethnicity, or their nationality. Also, many refugees are forced to flee from war. And so to give a bit more illustration to what the situation like back then, it was still like when President Trump was in office, there was a refugee ban going on in the US. Amnesty International reported that it's going to be like a really deadly year for refugees trying like to cross the Mediterranean Sea, some of them drowning on the journey. And then also that topic of like, how is misinformation actually harmful for refugees? And this is a really interesting topic because it's like a whole like industry built around, like if you think about like so many million people like trying to seek information, trying to like get out of the country where they're originally from, trying to like find a better home. Obviously, this creates opportunities that people also with misinformation, smugglers and so on are trying to like make business. And this is where the NGO and IRC as one of them really try to do a better job so people are informed by neutral information and they're not like selling off their lives to be on like risky and dangerous smuggler trips over the ocean. Let's take a look at the actual like product that we looked at. So this was what like refugee.info looked like back then. This is the app and mobile website, and this is basically the way we found it. This, as mentioned, this app was created over the course of 3 years, and it was updated, and more information was just added to it. So you can see how like it just became very dense and quite complicated to actually operate because there's such a wealth of information that also caused usability confusion. So at times, even the IRC team itself and us were in front of this app, not sure like if we fully like could navigate that. And thinking from that, obviously, how challenging it must be with someone who's a lot less familiar with the content. So just to maybe point out here, like one very specific design problem for you. When you look at the map in the middle, you see like all these dots like indicating that there is like services available and like important information for refugees in regard to like where in the city they can find what kind of info and help. But the table that explains what these different pins are is actually on a different page. So you cannot understand without going forth and back like what you're actually like looking at. For us, it was pretty clear, like from the start, that we want to try our best to like help make the revised product as useful as possible for the actual users. And this is why we decided to follow a user-centered design process, UCD in short. And I'm going to like tell you a little bit more like what these different like stages mean. So in the user-centered process, we usually start off by like really understanding. So in our case, this was even before we like went on the assignment, we tried to collect as many informations as possible, understanding like, hey, from like desk research, what's going on, what's the situation like, what has happened so far. We like got the stakeholder briefing, we read through that thoroughly, and we also started to prepare focus groups. So that we had a chance once we got to Greece, actually, in this case, we were able to like talk with like refugee populations directly ourselves to like understand their point of view, which is really important, not to only like listen to the NGO and to like what's being reported in the media, but the actual like user point of view. From there, we went into the observation phase, which was basically going over from like the focus groups where we had like group discussions into like interviews, ethnography, and heuristic evaluation. So these are all like different research methods that helped us to get a real 360 perspective on the problem space and like what the actual like user needs in this are. From there, we moved into the definition phase. That means like analyzing all the data we had collected and trying to like write how might we statements to transform our insights into like opportunities like how to improve. We also did like affinity diagramming. I think I have an example of that later on too, to like understand like what are all the themes that are coming up. So you're like basically checking yourselves against the brief, which originally is like your task, towards what's really like needed in order to improve the actual like user experience. Only then we went into brainstorming and ideation phase. So this was at that point when we had a really deep and thorough understanding of the situation and what we wanted to do, that we came up with ideas and solutions. We didn't only leave it there though, but we went into prototyping. So that means that we designed like new app designs. We thought about a social media strategy, an action plan, and also like guidance and documentation, because we think it's really important that these kind of projects are not like one-offs where you like help an organization and then you disappear again, but it's really about you sharing knowledge that can live with the organization and people can continue doing that kind of work. And in the very end, we also like tested again our assumptions and prototypes to like iterate and increase the usability. And we also had like some survey research tied to that. So let's take a closer look how our research helped to form a better understanding of refugees and their information needs. And I'm going to talk a little bit here also about the process, which was quite a learning journey for all of us, and maybe also something that you find interesting. First learning was building rapport and trusted collaboration can be really difficult when you work with a vulnerable population like that. As researchers, we learned that building that trust is something that's much harder than we know it from like doing product research in our like own organizations at Google. That is largely also because people have a high level of frustration and previously bad experiences already. They're also like in a really tough situation where like there's a high level of uncertainty for them. They might have been through traumatizing experiences, and we really needed to gather our need for information gathering to also like be really mindful of that and move with caution. So people who are already like traumatized and had like tough backgrounds were not like further challenged by our research. We also found that large groups, recording equipment, and groups of mixed genders, nationalities can increase the stress. And so while we started off with the focus groups, as I told you in the beginning, we actually decided to change the strategy towards smaller groups and like one-to-one interviews, and found that this really helped people to feel more trusted and more safe in the situation. Our second learning was that expectation in agenda setting is really important. The problem is that the refugees that we worked with, for many of them already for a long time, were on their journey, were in Greece, lived in like the camps. And with that, they already had talked to a lot of people. So they were quite used to like give interviews and information about their kind of background and situation and their needs. But we needed to talk with them very particularly about technology. And so it took some time to like create that mutual understanding about how they can help us the most, and that we are not like from an NGO ourselves, that we're like not service providers. We have nothing like to give to them, but if they actually like work with us and help us to understand better, they can invest into the long term of us creating like better solutions. But this, of course, again, as itself was like a process. And it really helped to tell them more about the background of the project and like trying to like give more context in why we were here and what we were doing. Third learning, I would say, refugees are not a homogeneous group. I mean, you can already, of course, gather that if I tell you there's over 65 million refugees in the world. Obviously, they are like very diverse and very different. We found that people have various cultural and geographic backgrounds, very different levels of literacy, cognitive abilities, tech savviness. And we also found like interesting things such as like that people actually were coming with like an app first mindset, that they weren't that used to the browsing and like searching behavior that we knew more from like our like standard research. And I think overall, also I want to say actually like here the pictures I'm using in this presentation are not the actual pictures from any of the like real clients like we work with and refugees. So we like kept everyone's identity like confidential and like making sure that everyone is safe and feeling trusted in our like working with them and getting us information. Fourth learning we had, the refugee.info app is not well enough known. So while people knew really well like the Facebook offering, like very little people actually like knew the app. And that was interesting for us, right? Because it was one of these assumptions that in the actual brief we weren't aware of, but because we did talk with the actual users, we learned about that. And we also found ways and reasons like why people were like hesitant to actually install an app on their phone, how like this was consuming like space on the device, how this was feeling like less up to date than the actual like Facebook comments and like updates. And also the way that they felt comfortable like learning on the internet, which maybe we were thinking needs to like be a certain way, but they were teaching us that it can be in many other ways. We also learned that theoretical accessibility does not mean universal access. So it was great news for us when we learned that all refugee camps are equipped with Wi-Fi now, and they have the right foundation to obtain information. Again, here, it really pays off to take a closer look to understand like what that means in day-to-day reality. To give you here the example is, yes, there is Wi-Fi in every camp, but it is in very specific spots. And then what happens often is that specific groups are occupying those spots, which means that, for example, if there's like a lot of like men hanging around there, women, for example, might not feel that comfortable to like go into the same areas and hang out there at the same times. So while theoretically there's access to everyone, practically it's like very limited, depending which group you belong to. We also found that informal networks and rumors dominate information landscape. So, for example, people were telling us, well, they have like these established ways of like learning through WhatsApp groups and through like their Facebook friends and like community owners about like what's going on, what's the latest and greatest. While when they went on refugee.info, they weren't sure when was this information uploaded. Is it still like the latest? Is it already outdated? And this, of course, created like massive like trust problems with the offerings that came from the NGO. We also found that information overload and fake news complicated the planning process. So here it's important to know that while some refugees knew the concept of like a search engine, most of the information came through the media and the messenger services already told. And there was just like so much information actually that it was overwhelming. And that came with like that like uncertainty that people actually weren't like trusting anything if it wasn't like vetted by several of the people that they trusted and like knew themselves. And so we understood that it would be critical to be like part of that vetting process and like kind of like helping to bring as much of like relevant and like trustworthy information into that process, rather than like trying to tell people like, hey, just because we say it, it's actually like true or to be trusted. But you have to like work with whatever mechanisms already exist so people really trust you and use the information. It was also hard because obviously some of the updates were really just tough. So if the borders got closed, if there was less support, if there was just bad news of any kind, it's important that the NGOs are straightforward about that. But people, of course, are hoping for good news. And so that kind of like trying to like be as true as possible without like being like too destructive in the way you deliver the news was really important, because if that was the case, then that opened again the door for smugglers who were planned out lying to people in order to give them good news, right, that they wanted to believe into. So a really like tough way of like balancing the information needs and the needs for like good and critical news. I already mentioned this one a little bit earlier. So there is this like mobile first mindset that we thought, oh, well, like everyone has a mobile phone. We know that too. So they probably are really savvy in using it. But we also understood that people do not necessarily like use browsers and like web addresses in the way that we anticipated, but people kind of like have certain apps installed and then they're like their go-tos. And one of those very important ones I already mentioned is Facebook. Another one were like messenger services. And so we found that a lot of people were very fluid in like operating those, like scrolling through content, like replying and messaging, but like doing an online search and trying to like get to information and maybe navigate like a lot of like detailed websites and like with a lot of information hierarchy was not that easy simultaneously for them, which was an important learning, of course, thinking about like how we should structure the new app. Second last learning was the process was designed to take time. And this was a frustrating experience, obviously, for all the refugees who are in the process, but also for us learning about this. Many of the people we met had already been like years into the process and tried to like figure out how they could get to the destination country, how they could build up new lives for them and their families, like how they can go about like sending their children to school and so forth and so on. But because there was no like clear solution of like what should happen with all these refugees in Europe, and because the political landscape became so complicated, it also meant that just a lot of people were kept in limbo like over time, and there was no certainty, and they had to live from day to day hoping for like new kind of information, seeing what could happen. And I think this is going to something like very deep as human beings, that this level of uncertainty is like really hard to deal with, but also something to consider and to know about while we're communicating with those populations. And lastly, we also found that information needs start way before people actually arrived in that country. So in this case, like Greece, where we like did our project, because people already do a lot of like information gathering before they even decide to like leave their hometown and go on that journey and like trying to like find a better location for them and their families to live or simply to escape. But the problem is if people don't have back then the right kind of information, they might go misinformed and in the end decide, oh, I should rather have stayed in a different country. I should have stayed where I originally was. So I think like understanding that information is not like a one-off like moment, but it's actually a journey that starts really early on when first considerations come in and before people even obtain the status of a refugee. And it goes all the way to like deciding like what to do once you're like in that legal system of a country and maybe asylum is granted to you or asylum is not granted to you, like being really well informed so you can make the best possible decisions for yourself along the way. I promised to you I would show you like the affinity diagramming. So here you see some of the themes that came up, which I also like touched about on already. Doing this kind of technique of like when you gathered like a lot of data about users and then seeing like, what is it that people talk about? Like what's the kind of like topics that really matter to them can help you to ground yourself again in like making the right kind of prioritization of topics. And now let's take a look at like what we developed. So with all these research findings in mind, we developed a new concept for refugee.info as the app, with a focus on a really clean and very accessible UX. One of the hard pieces of our design concept is a clickable process graph that helps any refugee to understand and navigate their personal asylum case. So rather than like throwing a lot of information at them, we try to like channel it as much as possible with like one question at a time, them giving the answer and us sending them then to the next step. This was accompanied with a concept of categories and content that addresses refugee needs in regard to travel and border information, but also aims to motivate them to take advantage of available education offerings, for example, work and social activities. And lastly, we also developed a social media strategy to increase the knowledge among refugees about the app and make it the natural extension of the Facebook page. So having a clear strategy of like what kind of information is provided on Facebook, and then how we can get people from Facebook into this more tailored experience, which we couldn't deliver on Facebook because of the limitations of the platform. But so people saw the actual value of having the app where we can also push like more frequent information to them. From our research, it also became clear that there is indeed a very clear information hierarchy. And so this hierarchy is directly related to the options available to the individuals. And so we created these like 3 main options, including the process to travel to your destination country, file asylum in the current country, or return to the country of origin. And while we're waiting for the case to get processed and like people understanding if they're eligible to like certain support options, it was kind of like the second information like priority. And then thirdly, children and also adults can, and in many cases want to attend school, of course, and education offerings for learning languages and general knowledge. So this is then what it looked like. Just to like show you a little bit, we had these like different languages, obviously, to like catering to like different like backgrounds and like language skills. Here is like the homepage updates page. One important thing here maybe is that we really try to like work with pictures and like short headlines so people could orient themselves quickly. We also always like added the date when something was added, so people understood like how recent and updated the information is. We had a lot of video content in there. Categories contain a list of available content. We had this like simplified structure, which provides a clear hierarchy and was more optimized forward scrolling rather than like clicking a lot through like depth and then needing to find your way back. We had this like yellow bar, which helps to distinguish overview versus subcategories. And of course, like addressing everyone in the language they feel most comfortable speaking and reading. Also like not only having text, but also audio formats. So if literacy was an issue, there's alternative ways to like be accessible for people. And then our actual like relaunch was done in like 2018. And yeah, this is actually bringing me to the end of my part of the talk, and I will now hand it over to Samantha. But I really just want to close by saying, I think if there's an opportunity for you to like work on a project where it's really about like helping people and like trying to like switch your perspective to one that is like very, very different from your like own day-to-day experience, this is a really rewarding project and something that has a lot of like learning and grow opportunity for you. So I encourage you then, if there is NGOs or like other opportunities for you to partner up with, take those opportunities. You can learn a lot, and you usually also get a lot of freedom to like help out and like gain new skills.
All right, thanks, Astrid. That's great. Let's see. Let's see if I think, okay, there we go. All right. Hi again, everyone. I'm Samantha. I'm also based in Switzerland, normally with Astrid. And I'm going to talk to you about a different structure project, but in a similar part of Google, where I spent 6 months as what we call a Google.org fellow, where I worked with six or so other Googlers in my office full-time for an NGO that was based in Switzerland also, called HurryDocs. And I'll tell you a little bit about how that project was structured, what we worked on, and why it mattered. So just a little bit about myself. So normally at Google, I am a software engineer, and I'm a software engineer specifically in what we call site reliability engineering. So you can kind of think of us as the kind of the fire department Google's services. So I've worked as a reliability engineer on products you may know like Gmail and Google Calendar and Google Meet. So that's my normal day job. But for 6 months, I didn't do that job at all, and instead was a Google.org fellow, where I worked as a full stack SWE or software engineer for HurryDocs, which is that NGO I was mentioning. So I worked on a variety of different kind of layers of their software stack, and really didn't think about my normal projects at Google for that whole time. So the Google.org Fellowship is a kind of a long-running program where nonprofits and sometimes even universities or city governments who have problems that they think could use a technology or software solution can apply and kind of write a project proposal for why Google should staff a team of Googlers to spend 6 months working on that problem with them. So this has happened in a I think at least in North America and in Europe, in the Middle East. I do not know if it has expanded yet to Asia. But this is an ongoing program, so stay tuned and check it out online if you're interested in learning more. So a little bit about the NGO or non-governmental organization that my project was with. They're called HurryDocs, which is a loose acronym of Human Rights Information and Documentation Systems. And they're based in Geneva, Switzerland, which is also where the United Nations human rights sections are based. So they are about a kilometer, their office is about 1 kilometer away from where the United Nations has its campus in Geneva as well. Their mission is to help human rights groups gather, organize, and use information to create positive change in the world. And they've been around since 1982, which you'll note is long before it was common for us to have cell phones or internet or personal computers. So they've been around longer than a web development stack of open source software was the tool of choice. But they are, again, more focused on the mission of kind of improving access to human rights related information in a variety of different formats. So I think back in the 80s, the way they did that was perhaps by publishing, books or magazines and kind of printing things out on paper and shipping them places. And yeah, that's clearly evolved since then. And this kind of positions them as a kind of a unique intersection of technology and in the human rights space. So being based in Geneva, there are a lot of other non-governmental organizations and nonprofits working on human rights problems that are nearby, so they can work with them and partner with them. Some of their partner organizations include the organization called Girls International, who's working on advancing girls' rights to education, among other things. And they work with a number of other human rights courts, and they work with the United Nations itself. And I will tell you more in a little bit about what their software actually does. But just to set the stage, as Astrid mentioned, none of this was kind of an individualistic endeavor. On the left side, these were the Googlers who worked on this project, and we were mostly based in Zurich, with a couple of folks also joining us from Munich, which is in Germany, not too far away. And then we worked with, among others, these folks on the right here from HurryDocs, who were based all over the world, which kind of gave us a taste of remote work before COVID happened. This was back in 2019. So they're based in Spain, in Germany, in Ecuador, and in France. And so we got very good at having a lot of video meetings and working over chat during our time with them. But I'll just mention that we were a relatively small team, but that was also for Google's scale a very small team. But for the nonprofit we were working with, we were a sizable, perhaps like 50% increase in the number of people in their entire organization. And so that was one of the challenges that we were kind of mindful of going in, that we would be kind of an overwhelming new force in their organization, and we had to figure out how to work together in a way that made sense for everyone. So as I mentioned, the software HurryDocs has used and built, has evolved over the years. Farther to the left over here is like an MS-DOS version of this cataloging software that they've built. And on the right here is UIUX, which is the current version and current product that they build and offer to their partner organizations. So again, like they see the software not as the goal itself, but as a tool by which they can help improve human rights work in a variety of different contexts. And as that situation changes or the context changes, they may change again what technology they employ to help them accomplish that. So for me, I personally have been working at Google for about 9 years, and I have worked at Google since I was in university, which means that I am not very well versed in what it's like to work in software outside of Google. And so this was a steep learning curve for me to kind of get used to all these tools and frameworks and kind of the way that the outside world beyond Google writes software and web applications. So obviously we didn't use any Google internal tools or systems to help them, because the goal was that when the fellowship ended, the organization would retain all the rights and source code that we had built while we were doing this project. And so we didn't want to leave them with something they couldn't further iterate on themselves. The other thing that is perhaps interesting to think about in the cloud context is that the human rights sector is often put in a political position where they are oftentimes accusing governments of things that the governments perhaps do not want to be publicly accused of in human rights violations. So they generally do not have human rights groups generally do not have a high level of trust for cloud providers, because cloud providers are required to comply with government, originating law enforcement requests. So if you can imagine that a government wanted to retaliate against someone who's maybe making a legal case in a country where that kind of thing happens, as it does, they wouldn't want that the cloud provider would just hand over the data that they have on file. So they generally like to run all of their software instances themselves rather than trust them to a cloud provider. So you may recognize some of these tools. A lot of these are open source tools for similar reasons to kind of the human rights mission that they have more generally. They really tended to prefer using and building on open source technology, because they think that helps further access to information more broadly around the world, and that transparency generally helps human rights. So we used GitHub to check in our source code. We made use of Google's TensorFlow, which is a machine learning framework. We used Node.js, we used MongoDB, we used Elasticsearch. The web UI was built with React and Redux. We wrote code in TypeScript, which can be compiled to JavaScript, but has some nice type properties that JavaScript does not have. We wrote some of the machine learning based code with Python, and I made use of VS Code, which is Microsoft's web-based IDE or development tool for writing code itself that has a lot of nice extensions and plugins for interacting with all of these other technologies that we were using. So all of these were new to me, perhaps besides GitHub, because at Google, we tend to have a lot of our own built in-house tools and frameworks for accomplishing a lot of the same things. So that was a challenge for me as I got started. So the project that we were actually working on was a text classification project. So this is roughly the data lifecycle diagram of UIUX and where our project kind of fit in. So imagine, if you will, the idea of like Google search, which lets you search over a collection of like the entire public internet's documents, first and foremost. And by document here, I mean a web page, a PDF, content in a YouTube video, content embedded in the alternate text of an image, things that you can find publicly on the internet. But generally all of those I'll call documents. So imagine that, but instead of being a search over the public internet, it's instead a private collection of documents. So, think of like if you have a Mac computer, like Spotlight lets you search over the files that already are on your computer. And I think, they're equivalents on other operating systems, but you search on your phone for applications. So there's some kind of document index that lets you, when you type in a search query, it finds the document or the file or the website that you're looking for. So what UIUX does is lets their partner, HurryDocs' partner organizations have an instance of UIUX, which is this kind of indexing system with a web UI for you to be able to search over your private collection of documents. And imagine that there's one instance of this for each kind of partner organization that wants to use it. So this is like the human rights part of the UN has a document collection that they would like people to be able to search over. Girls International has a similar instance. The Human Rights Court of Latin America has a similar instance, all for different reasons, but vaguely human rights related. But to be able to find what you are looking for, it is very useful for humans to provide additional annotations for these documents, generally. And that's what had been happening before. So let's say that you're a human rights court, or you're an organization who is trying to publish the legal outcomes of a human rights court in, say, Latin America. And people who are searching through your data have particular kinds of topics they're interested in. So maybe they're interested in access to water. Maybe they're interested in the topic of human trafficking. Maybe they're interested in, girls' access to education. Maybe they're interested in, torture and retaliation from authoritarian governments during like uprisings against those governments. So each of those topics, it is then useful to like kind of annotate each of your documents in your document collection to have which topics those might be associated with. And that takes a lot of time, right? If you have like dozens of pages of legal documents and court outcomes, and someone has to sit there and read the whole thing to decide like, yes, this is about, water rights, conflicted access to water rights, and they add that tag. That ends up eating into a lot of human time to kind of read all of these things and add these tags. So what we did as part of our project with HurryDocs was we worked on building in a machine learning, training a machine and tuning a machine learning model that did natural language processing that could basically, computer reads the whole document. And then the computer, based on our model that we trained, would suggest which topics this was about. So, you can imagine that, this is an oversimplification, but if there's a lot of mentions of the word water rights in the document, and water rights is one of the topics that we might want to suggest that then the model might learn that, like, okay, I should suggest that this is about water rights. And so what this looks like in the UWASI UI was we had kind of a user journey for the administrators of the document collections. So this is the kind of admin view, one of the admin views of UWASI, where we would let the administrators like teach UWASI what labels belonged with which documents. And if you're familiar with machine learning, like you generally want to have a training set of data that you provide to train your model. So like basically just data that's already been labeled the way that you would want the computer to label similar data in the future. And so we could basically kind of automate this journey by letting the administrator basically just manually label things, and then our machine learning model would be able to then kind of tune itself and retrain the data based on what those labels that administrator added were. So bringing this all together, what this meant was that eventually in the future, once there was a good machine learning model for this training data, these are obviously example documents, but if each of these boxes is a document in the UWASI database, UWASI would now suggest these particular topics about these documents. So recruitment of child soldiers is an issue. Children and children's rights was an issue. And for each of these, instead of having to type the topics themselves, the administrator could just click accept or reject on each of these. And on the right bar here, you could filter by, show documents with suggested topics. So you could see like which ones had pending suggestions that the administrator could go in and review. There's lots of interesting kind of machine learning details in this, but I will kind of wrap this up here and see if you have any questions about that at the end. But this basically was a balance between, we didn't want machine learning to kind of, we knew that machine learning does not solve all of our problems, it just creates different problems, right? So this way we kind of balanced like the quality, like we made sure that, there was still an expert human who was familiar with human rights, who was reviewing all of these changes, but we hopefully could save them some time in the long run by speeding up how quickly they could review and annotate all of these documents. So if you're interested in this fellowship program, being a fellow is something that happens within Google, but there's all kinds of different programs that Google.org ends up organizing. So the fellowship is one. There's also the AI, Artificial Intelligence Impact Challenge. So I would encourage you, if you are involved in any kind of nonprofit organization and are looking for funding or for guidance or some kind of accelerator format, Google.org has a lot of really interesting programs to work with organizations outside of Google. So check out what those are and see if any of those are interesting to you. And then you might end up eventually working with someone like me. So with that, I'll say thank you. And I think we are going to take some questions.
Okay, thank you, Samantha and Astrid, for the sharing. Maybe we can add Astrid to the stage so we can take the questions from the Slido. Okay, let me quickly share the Slido link. Okay, so for the first questions, I think this is for Astrid. As a UX designer, what is the most challenging things for you when conducting research? And how did you develop a product that will solve the problems that you face during the research?
Okay, well, I don't know now if this is specific to the context of the IRC project or more generally, but I think what's I think challenging is that the first intuition we have is that we bring our very own experience to the table, right? And this is also important because you have a lot of design skills and you made experiences over time, what works and what doesn't work. But I think the one thing I recommend for every UX designer is like, don't settle on that. Don't jump to the solution right away, but really try to like empty your hat and educate yourself and like do the research and let really the users inspire your thinking, and then return to like brainstorming and like execution and designing mode. And you will probably see there's quite a difference between your early designs when you just start designing right away versus if you take in the research learnings and try to change your own point of view towards that of the user.
Okay, thank you, Astrid. Let's go to the next questions. I think it's still for Astrid. Does UI UX design needs to have a good skill for the front end programming?
Yeah, we can probably both say something on that. I would say it really depends like where you're operating. I think in like smaller efforts and companies, it's definitely good if you have like a toolkit of like being able to play different roles of the UX process. So meaning like you can do some research, you know how to do your designs, you can do easy prototyping to make flows come alive and make it easier to test and iterate on. If you are in a bigger company, we are usually more specialized. And so you will have colleagues who are like helping with that and you work together as a team. Nevertheless, I think like all these UX skills and like venturing as much as possible in the different disciplines really helps you to be a very rounded UX expert.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Samantha, do you have something to add?
I don't actually, because I generally am working more with infrastructure behind a lot of our user-facing products. I actually don't interact so often with our great UX teams. But I think I'll give a generic answer in the form of like, I think it's really useful if you have time to kind of go a little bit more broad or a little bit more deep than the immediate project you might be working on, so you can understand what the challenges are for the people you're working with, which I think makes the team overall a bit more effective. So if you kind of can empathize with what's challenging about what you're asking other teams to do, I think that's a useful thing to think about.
Thank you. Okay, next questions. I think this is can apply for both of you. How to persuade your boss or organizations to get the funding to build a tech for good? Because I think the students mentioned that many people doesn't think that this gonna be a profitable things. So maybe you can give like opinions or suggestion for him.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't personally had to convince anyone of this specifically, but I will say that, you know, when I did the Google.org Fellowship and the other times I volunteered with Google.org on various projects, they have been at a cost of kind of interrupting my normal work at Google. And so I kind of had to give a pitch to my boss, who, you know, could have told me like, no, actually, we need you to stay and work on this project. It has a tight deadline or something. But I instead found that, you know, I was worried about asking, and then I kind of considered what was I worried about, and I was worried they would say no. But then I realized like, well, okay, then there's no reason to not ask, because if the worst thing that happens is they tell me I can't do it, that's fine, but I should still ask. And in all the cases I've asked, I think you'll be surprised sometimes how generous some people are. I don't think this works in every context, but I think it's definitely worth asking and kind of creating a good story for why you think it's important. And a lot of times people will kind of say, oh yeah, that does seem like a good thing for you to do. Maybe you should try it.
So don't afraid to ask. Okay, yeah. Astrid.
Sorry, I would give +1 to what Samantha said, and I will also add, I think especially when you're in a smaller company or like less like where there's less of like a program that already exists, I recommend that you maybe also start off by yourself, right? And seeing this, like, because to be honest, I mean, like we do a lot of that work also on top of like our normal work, right? So it's not like it's just fitting 100% in working hours. And I think what your boss wants to see is that you're passionate and serious about that and that you can create value. So if you get started on something and you maybe have something to show already, and then you have a specific pitch for them, how they can support you, this makes it a lot easier to say yes than if you come to them and you say like, I want to do tech for good. How can you help me, right? Because that puts it on them to like find a solution. But if you basically come with like a clear ask and a solution kind of like already on the way, then they can say, yeah, sure, it's fine for you to like take a day off to like work on that, or it's fine for you to print that stuff at the office, or like whatever kind of resourcing it is that they can provide. So making it as concrete as possible is something I recommend.
Thank you. Okay, next is for Samantha. Samantha, earlier you told that the tech stack that you use during the Googleorg Fellowship is you didn't master all of them, right? How did you master that, and how fast you learn it, and how you learn it?
Yeah. By the way, I'm not totally sure. That one only has 1 vote, and the one below it has 27 votes. So I'm not sure if that's actually the top question, but I'll answer that question. I just want to point that out. So I think the way I will answer this is definitely I've not mastered all of these, right? Like there's too many. There's not enough hours in the day to become a master in really any single technology, unless that is the technology you also work on full time. What I will say is that I think that the way I approach learning new technologies is usually I like to do it in a context of a problem I want to solve. And so instead of saying like, I want to go understand React, I might say like, I would like to build, a specific kind of website that, is a game. Let's say like, I want to build a game website. And to do that, I think I want to learn how to use React. So I will use React in a way that helps me actually accomplish a specific solution to a specific problem. And for me, that's worked out both in my time at Google and also while I was on this fellowship, in the form of, I didn't need to be a deep expert on everything. I needed to know enough to be able to do the thing I wanted to do.
Yep, agreed. Okay, the next questions. How are you going to make changes from diversity in tech? Because I think now Astrid and Samantha is leading a team. Like, did you do something with your team, or do you have any specific criteria when selecting your team and stuff like that? Can you share a bit about the diversity in tech that you already did?
Yeah, I can. I built up a team over the last 2 years in my core role, and I definitely I have a very female team. Maybe that's one to consider. Where in tech, we still have often like way over 80%, 90% like male team members. So this is something that was really important to me. I think also diversity to the sense of like having people with like very different backgrounds. So not only having people who studied like a PhD of human-computer interaction and hence are UX researchers, but I actually have people on my team who used to be architects, who worked in gaming, who have like just a lot of like different angles on what a good user experience can look like. And then giving them the opportunity to like, if you're good people and you're really like ambitious and want to like grow and learn and develop, giving them the right kind of environment to do that and like have them grow in their diversity together as a team to something that can do great work at Google. So those are maybe two aspects where I looked into doing something more for diversity.
What you said?
I will echo the kind of diverse backgrounds of along many different axes. Like there's a team member of mine who used to be a lawyer, decided they wanted to learn how to be a software engineer instead and kind of quit their job as a lawyer. And yeah, so there's kind of people come from a variety of different backgrounds, and that's super valuable in a context where you need to be, you know, if you're diversity in the sense of like thought diversity, we as a group kind of socially as humans tend to do better when, and there's some research for this that shows that, you know, if you have one super competent person and everyone else just agrees with them, you aren't going to get to as good of a result or a solution as if you maybe have people with different opinions who end up figuring out how to get to the best answer collectively. And so I think that's a super valuable trait to have in a team. I'll just add also that, you know, one of the things I feel strongly about in the context of the diversity topic as a software engineer is that, you know, there's kind of two ends of the pipeline. There's kind of recruiting, like how do we have enough diverse candidates that we end up hiring into jobs? And then there's also kind of a retention aspect. And I personally feel like that part of it gets left out of the discussion a lot. Like it's easier to talk about how, you know, you'll have a lot of students that will end up becoming great diverse hires for a particular industry. But I think it's useful also to think about how are you going to keep them happy in that industry? Like how are you going to create an environment where people want to stay and they want to work as someone who might not be a majority group member?
Yeah, agree. Yeah, I think for Bangkit as well, we have some students, I think it's around 5% coming from non-tech background, and they are now learning about machine learning, learning about Android. So yeah, I think the Samantha's point, like to how we make them like to feel comfortable while they are doing this is also very important. Okay, because I think we almost running out of time. I think last questions for both of you. What things or what situations that make you feel excited the most when you involve in the tech industries?
I would say still our like ability to actually touch people's lives and like scale at things that was not previously possible with like working in most industries and like innovation areas. And I feel like so much is coming down towards we have much more available to us. Like you can today get a university degree online, right? Like you can learn, you have like all these like initiatives that theoretically make it so easy to like advance and invest into yourself and yeah, just reach a better understanding of the world and how we can all be good for each other and for the world. And so that personally makes me very excited about like working in it. I will caveat, because I also don't want it to sound too easy, that we're of course far away from that, and there's also many threats that come from being in this technology environment, and how we're seeing that it can be misused for misinformation and for like harassments and like many like really severe topics, as well as just like drowning in the internet rather than like taking that full advantage of like what it can offer to improve. So, but still, like I think the advantages are outweighing the disadvantages, and I hope I can inspire as many people as possible with what's the good stuff about technology and how it can help us.
Really nice, Astrid.
Yeah,
How about you, Sam?
I will echo that. I've also been working on making sure Google Meet continues to work reliably over the past year, which I'm not sure how often. I think a lot of students in Indonesia actually are using Google Meet these days, but
yeah,
that's been a very, very challenging aspect of my job, but it also really energized me because, you know, getting to feel like there was clearly my work was helping directly make sure kids could like continue to go to school or people could continue to operate their businesses. I find very fulfilling as a human to feel like it mattered, right? Like the work I'm doing matters. I'll also say that as a more general thought, like when what motivates me in general is like the ability to kind of help solve problems that really affect like people's lives, as Astrid said. And one of my favorite questions to ask in a variety of contexts is always, what problem are we trying to solve, right? Like a lot of people have ideas and they think like, oh, it might be cool if we did this, but I think having a really clear understanding of like why you would like to do something or why you think a project is important or what problem you think that solves helps really clarify a lot of times like what the right choice to make. Like, should you use, is software really something that's going to help solve that problem? And if that's true, then I think you should go for it. I think there's a lot of problems that software really can make a big difference in still. So that's what motivates me.
Okay, thank you so much, Samantha and Astrid, for your time today. I think we are running out of time. Thank you so much, everyone who tuning in as well on YouTube Live. We will have the next session for IWD on the next Friday, so feel free to tune in to the YouTube Live that we already shared in your Google Calendars. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.